So I'd like to take this opportunity to wish my friends and my family who are not in contact with me, but nevertheless, I'd like to wish both friends and family a happy and a healthy new year. And of course, I think more than ever, this is a new year that is, with this Rosh Hashanah, it's a time for deep, deep reflection. Personal reflection and reflection in a more general sense of where Judaism is today and what kind of Judaism you want to embrace for yourself and for the collective. Because and whether you want that Judaism to be seen as how it has always intended to be, which is a religion with a deep ethical and moral foundations that have been the foundations for our morality, not just in the Jewish world, but have basically been the foundations that have influenced the morality for the Judeo-Christian thought and beyond. I mean, morality is at the heart of every religion, whether it be Judaism, whether it be Christianity, whether it would be Islam, any religion. And for it's only throughout history that we've seen that those religions have, when they have been corrupted by more radical elements or by influences from the outside that ultimately have nothing to do with religion itself, that religion becomes compromised. And sadly, that's quite obvious that is what is happening to Judaism today. And I think it's incumbent upon every Jew today to decide whether, as a Jew, you want to embrace a religion or the religion that you've grown up in, or whether you want it to be corrupted by a political ideology that at its basis has nothing to do with religion. And of course, I'm talking about Zionism. Zionism is not a religion. To try and conflate those two things is just perverse. Zionism is a political ideology that comes directly out of the settler-colonialism of Europe from the past centuries, with the same mentality that settler-colonialism has had from its roots, which today, in our world today, is certainly something that has no longer a place. It was in the past century and centuries. It was something that was unquestioned its ethical basis, but mankind has progressed from there, or we would like to think it has, in the sense that colonialism is no longer something that can be justified, because the roots, or the essence of colonialism sees the indigenous population of the land that is to be colonized as something, as barbarians that need to be educated, that need to be that have no culture and needs to be ingrained with the superior culture and vision of the occupiers, and ultimately with the vision that with the vision that, or with the knowledge that the indigenous population are going to naturally oppose any kind of occupation on them, and that as a result the only way to deal with that is by force. That if you want to occupy a land that is already where there is already an indigenous population living upon it, that the only way to do so is by force, and invariably through destroying that population by ethnically cleansing them or genociding them, or both. And that is what happened in the past, of course. If we look historically at any of the lands that were where the settler-colonials from Europe went to, Australia, America, New Zealand, Canada, South America, and this is that has nothing to do with religion. Let's get that clear. So to try and believe today that Zionism is somehow a part of Judaism and ingrained in the religion itself is simply wrong. It's false. And I mean, we can see that by if you look at both the forefathers and the founders and of Zionism, and those who were responsible to bringing it to where it is today. I mean, that can be clearly seen. In fact, in the past, there was a much more honest approach, at least. I wouldn't say a more ethical approach, but at least a more honest approach. I mean, if you take Jabotinsky, who is basically the today Israel's politics, Israel's ideology, and where it wants to go. It's based essentially on Jabotinsky's ideology and views. I'm going to read a couple of quotes from him, because and you will see that Jabotinsky is far more honest, brutally honest, about the project than it is today, because today you simply cannot admit that it's not accepted. But that is what is underlying the very the Zionism's project, and which ultimately has led us into genocide today. But it was always there at the DNA, in the DNA of Zionism from its roots. So I'm going to read to you something. this is something that Zev Jabotinsky said in 1920. He wrote in 1923 in his like, if you like, monumental transcript, The Iron Wall. He wrote, "Every indigenous people will resist alien settlers as long as they see any hope of ridding themselves of the danger of being colonized. This is how the Arabs will behave and go on behaving so long as they possess a gleam of hope that they can prevent the transformation of Palestine into the land of Israel." And he goes on to write, "Zionist colonization can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach." He wrote that in 1923 in the document The Iron Wall. And then he went on to write in 1925, "If you wish to colonize a land in which people are already living, you must find a garrison for the land, or find a benefactor who will provide a garrison on your behalf. Zionism is a colonizing venture, and therefore it stands or falls on the question of armed forces." So there was no illusion from the very beginning, the very origins of Zionism. There was no illusion that the project of Zionism was basically occupying, colonizing a land where there was an indigenous population already present, and the only way to do that was by force. And that has been at the essence of Zionism from the beginning, and of course is there today in its most brutal and inhuman form. And for those who say that Jabotinsky was some kind of extreme element, well, first of all, he's not, because it's his views that are Jabotinsky is the person whose ideology is basically at the mainstay of all Israeli politics today, certainly Netanyahu's. But this was these views were either explicitly, overtly, or more covertly there from the beginning of all the Zionist fathers. So for instance, Herzl, it was the same with Herzl. I mean, there was no illusion that what they wanted was to occupy the whole land and to expel the Palestinians. Herzl, for instance, even if publicly he might at times have given the impression that the Zionist project was to live in harmony with the Palestinians. Obviously, Herzl was the one who brought Zionism to the fore in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century. But he writes in private, for instance, he writes the following in his diary. He says, this was in 1885. In his diaries. He writes, "We must expropriate gently the private property on the estates assigned to us. We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, whilst denying it any employment in our country. The property owners will come over to our side. Both the process of expropriation and removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly." And he goes on to write a year later in his well-known writings, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state. He writes, "The Jewish state would form a part of a wall of defense for Europe in Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism." I mean, that's precisely how the colonial mindset of seeing the indigenous population as barbarians, and that what is needed is this enlightened Western mindset to educate the barbarians and enlighten them in their ignorance, and of course ultimately try to expel them, certainly exploit them. So this is what the ideology of Zionism is based on from the beginning. And today it's come to its apotheosis in genocide. The 7th of October was nothing but a pretext, or if you like, a catalyst for what was always at the essence of Zionism, which was complete possession of the lands and the ethnic cleansing or disappearance in any way, including, of course, genocide, of the indigenous population. And even at the very beginning, we see that with the first Israeli Prime Minister, Ben-Gurion. I mean, again, perhaps not publicly. Ben-Gurion publicly might have given the impression that what Israel was quite happy in just accepting a partitioned Palestine and living with a Palestinian state alongside a Jewish state. But that simply was not true. That's not what what was at the base of the Zionist goals. And he writes, Ben-Gurion writes a letter to his son Amos from London in October 1937. So that was before the state was actually declared. He writes, "The partitioning of Palestine." He writes, "We need to erect a Jewish state at once, even if it is not in the whole land. The rest will come in the course of time. It must come. I am certain we will be able to settle in all other parts of the country, whether through agreement and mutual understanding with our Arab neighbours or in another way." So, again, you tell me, how does that have anything to do with religion? How does that have anything to do with the essence of Judaism? It doesn't. You either can agree with a colonial mindset that basically sees itself as some kind of superior, and Zionism is an ethno-supremacist, so superior with an ethnicity involved, but a superior mindset, a superior race that is taking possession of a land that belongs to someone else. And yes, you could say that. Yes, but it was given to us by Balfour in the Balfour Declaration by Britain. It was written clearly in 1917, but But Britain was a colonial power. It was occupying that land. It wasn't theirs to give to anyone. So, I mean, what hubris to think that you can just... And it was done in order to basically protect the British interests or the colonial interests in the Middle East, in Palestine, which is right up to the present day how the West views Israel's presence there as a way of maintaining that hegemony of Western influence, but with absolutely no regard for the indigenous population. But that has nothing to do with Judaism. This is Rosh Hashanah. So I'm talking about this now because Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish festival. It's the Jewish New Year. And you have to ask yourselves, what is being done in my name? Because Israel, Zionism, it's hijacked Judaism. It's basically said, we are the state of the Jews, and therefore any critique of us is a critique of Judaism, which simply is not the case. And there are more and more and more Jews, especially from the younger generation, where it is today, I would say, a majority. But there are more and more Jews who are waking up and are realizing that Israel and that Zionism does not speak in their name. And it's taking away from the ethics and the deep ethical basis that is at the heart of Judaism. And it's corrupting that. And it threatens to corrupt the very heart of Judaism. And at some stage, everyone is going to have to decide. Every Jew is going to have to decide where do my inner beliefs lie? Do I want to be an ethical being? And if I'm religious, then do I want to base that ethics on the basis of my religion itself? Or do I want it to be hijacked, and do I want that ethics to, if you like, go out the window and be replaced by this political ideology that has no interest in ethics or morality, but basically its whole interest is in occupation and total possession of a land, and damn the indigenous population. They're an inconvenience, so we will disappear them in one way or another, or put them under complete and utter oppression and subjugation. And of course, that subjugation has been going on for years and decades. And I mean, just ask yourselves, has there ever been in history a people who have been occupied and subjugated and oppressed in that way, who have not at some stage revolted, who have not resisted, who have not risen up against that oppression and subjugation? There hasn't. So, however violent and reprehensible the deeds themselves on the acts on the 7th of October, and yes, many innocent or people, civilians, were killed. I think it's up to 800 civilians, although we know that we don't know the full number, but quite a lot of those civilians were actually killed by the Hannibal Directive, which means by the Israeli forces themselves, in order to prevent them being taken prisoner or in some way compromise the Israeli forces. But so we don't know the true number that were actually killed by the resistance forces, by Hamas. But yes, there were a sizable number. And but what you need to ask yourselves, That was not where this all began. And that uprising was inevitable. And many of you might remember that a few years ago, there was a peaceful uprising by the Palestinians in Gaza called the March of Return. They went peacefully to the border of their open-air concentration camp. So that was to the border of Gaza, looking onto the lands of Israel on the other side, which were basically where all those kibbutzim are. They were the lands that most of those in Gaza used to live. That was their homeland. They still see it as their homeland. And they went there to the border peacefully to demonstrate to protest their captivity, their oppression, and the denial of returning to their lands. And what was Israel's reply to that peaceful protest? It was putting snipers all along the fence there and taking them out. So you had nurses, you had disabled people in wheelchairs, you had pregnant women, you had journalists, and you had adolescents, you had children. They were all shot. Hundreds upon hundreds, thousands were shot and maimed and killed. So think about it. What they had no hope, nothing left to. They were basically an oppressed population with no hope, with the highest unemployment in the world, where Israel is controlling the amount of calories going into the Gaza Strip. And that's been documented by Israel. That they're quite proud to say that we put into place a plan so that we know every single calorie that's going into the Gaza Strip, so that we can ensure that that they have just about enough to survive on. I mean, what kind of life is that? Just imagine. Put yourself in that position. Imagine that you were born into that, and think that you have no hope for your future, no hope for your children's future, and nothing to lose for trying to resist. An injustice, to trying to resist the injustice that's been going on for years and decades, and simply is unsustainable and unacceptable. But today, on Rosh Hashanah, it's a Jewish New Year. It's not a new, and as Jews, you should be thinking, where do you want to stand as human beings? And where do you want to stand with respect to your religion if you are religious? Do you want your morality and your ethics and your... Do you want that all to be hijacked by a political ideology that cannot be justified? Because it has no moral basis. It has no moral compass. Oppressing, disappearing another population is not justified today in the 21st century. And that's why you have that's why you have so many millions upon millions upon millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions across the world who are shouting out, speaking out against this, because it's unacceptable. It might have been acceptable in the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. The idea of supremacy of the West, that the Western mindset somehow is so much more superior, and therefore that we need to, as Jabotinsky said, we need to, or as Herzl said, that we need to both of them. We need to both colonize and somehow re-educate these barbarians. But that's not acceptable today. That's not the mindset of the 21st century. I'd like to bring your attention to another form of Zionism that was around at the beginning of the 20th century. And that wasn't political Zionism, it was spiritual Zionism. And that they were Zionists who had a love for the land. So they called themselves Zionists, but they called themselves spiritual Zionists because their love for the land came out of the true nature of their true contact with an understanding of what Judaism represented, a spiritual religion with an ethical basis. And as such, it entailed a respect for the land and a respect for the people on that land. And those spiritual Zionists, they wanted to live in harmony with the population that were already there. They didn't want to dominate them. They didn't want to occupy them. They didn't want to disappear them, to ethnically cleanse the land, or to subjugate them, or to see them as barbarians. No, they wanted to live in harmony with them because that was the essence, the spiritual essence of what they believed, both for the land and their religion. And I want to, in that sense, I want to read some words from one of the great beings of that movement, Martin Buber, which many of you might have heard of. And Buber objected to the politics that uses power to expand power. And he wrote this. He wrote, "The weapons of war may defeat the land, vanquish it, but they cannot conquer it. Conquest must come from within as a deed of love. The land will never be ours. True Judaism, a Judaism grounded in original religious force, can be effective only in radical opposition to these powers. The only politics that is a must is achieving a lasting brotherly understanding with the Arabs in all areas of public life. Our social order must be determined by our ancient tradition of justice and communality. Though the tradition about Zion speaks of a sacred association of the people of Israel and its holy land, it is the command of this hour to include the Arab in this communion." And Buber wrote that in an article that was called "The Conquest of Palestine" between 1917 and 1918. And he believed deeply and passionately, as I said, that this notion of living in harmony with the indigenous population. So effectively, it's what he wanted, basically, the idea which many are returning to today, many of us who, both Palestinians and Jews, who believe in a righteous path forward. These spiritual Zionists, they believed in one state for all the peoples, so living together in harmony, both Arabs and Jews. Acknowledging the fact that the Jews were coming onto this land where a population, an indigenous population, already lived. And in his book on Zion, which was published in 1944, there's a passage where he speaks about the linguistic term Adam and Adamah. So Adam is the obviously the name of the first in the Garden of Eden, the first man, and it's in Hebrew, so it's also the Hebrew for man, and you have the word Adamah, which is the same word but just with the a on the end, which means earth. So he plays with these words, or he with the relation between them, between man and the earth, because for Buber the earth, and he's talking about Zion here, so the earth of Palestine, was something that was sacred and something that needed to be respected, just like a person. He saw it almost like this living entity that would react if it wasn't respected, and if it was abused in any way, it would come back onto man himself, and they would have to pay the price. So he writes, the biblical earth has to answer for the offences of man, who springs from and is dependent on it. They are bound up with one another, for better and for worse, but in such a way that it is man who determines the fate of the earth by his conduct, the fate which in return becomes his own. So as you see, he's basically, and again, a very deeply religious and spiritual man. He's talking about this reciprocal relationship between man and the land that he's living upon. And if you abuse that relationship and you don't respect it, it's going to come back onto you. And it will be your fate that will suffer. I mean, the Buddhists could take that, could see that in a more karmic way, and basically see that, say that what Israel is prosecuting today, the genocide, the Holocaust that it is prosecuting against the Palestinians, that ultimately that they are creating enormous collective negative karma for themselves, for the nation. But you don't have to see it in a Buddhist light. I mean, you have there someone like this beautifully spiritual, religious man, Martin Buber, who is showing you that he was taking that out of the roots of Judaism, or the ethics from an ethical, moral point of view. But again, you can take that whether you're religious or not. We all have ethics, we all have morality, and it should be obvious that that what Israel is doing today, its behaviour, its total absence of respecting human life and dignity and worth of the other in their midst, that ultimately is destroying the very soul of themselves. So the destruction is not just on the other, though of course that is the destruction that we see today. That is the visual destruction of so many tens of thousands of innocent civilians, mostly women and children, who have been slaughtered in their tents, when their dwellings were still, when the houses and buildings were still intact, in bombing the houses. I mean, they say today, I mean, this is a tiny enclave, the size of Gaza is the size of East London or something like that. It's tiny, but they say that I think it's been estimated that about up to today, up to 10 nuclear bombs of Hiroshima bombs have been poured onto this, have been detonated, the equivalent, on this strip, one of the most densely populated area in the world. So, resulting in just so much untold death and destruction. And those who say that, oh, but it was collateral damage, I mean, that's not true either. You've got hundreds and hundreds of doctors from the outside who have come. You have so many doctors who have come out of Gaza and say and have given evidence, have given testimony of the number of children that they have been treating who have been targeted with sniper shots to their head. So there's no accident in that. And we've all seen the videos of the Israeli soldiers that are dressing up in the women's clothing of the residences that they then occupy before destroying them, and just laughing at the destruction. And evidence of quite happily having destroyed, knowing that there's citizens in the buildings that they're destroying, and so many declarations from the politicians that there are no, including the President of Israel, who was just received in the UK, that there are no innocents in Gaza. So this failure of Zionism to see others as people, to basically see, with this supremacist mindset that basically just simply only sees the value in their own lives and cannot value the other in any kind of way, but certainly not as equal to themselves, that their lives do not have the same rights, and certainly not the right to exist as they do. I mean, it's abhorrent. The world sees that. But just think about what that is doing to the soul of the nation itself. And you, as Jews, whether you're inside Israel or outside Israel, just think, is that the kind of ethics? Is that the kind of morality that you want to internalize? And is that what you want to, in some perverse way, hybridize with Judaism itself? Because as I started, this has nothing to do with Judaism. This political ideology that is now at its endgame, where it's using as a pretext and as a catalyst the horrific events of 7th of October, but inevitable in many ways, but using that as a pretext to bring to the fore the final solution, the end game for what was always there in the DNA of Zionism, as I have pointed out with the quotes from the fathers of Zionism. So that's where I want to end. I want you to think very, very carefully of what kind of human being do you want to be? And what kind of morality do you want to form and sculpture your being as you go forward into this next year and beyond? And do you want your religion, Judaism, ultimately to be corrupted by this kind of outside political ideology, which has its roots in the settler-colonialism of the past? And also, of course, has been today inside Israel hijacked, if you like, by the messianic elements as well. So this is a time for reflection, deep reflection, of how you want Judaism to be and how you want you as an individual to be. Shana Tova.